Hello and welcome. My name is Amartya Sinha. I'm the Chief Coordinator here at the Nalanda, and today I'm in conversation with someone who's spent 26 years serving for the country, someone who's written extensively on the strategy, affairs, diplomacy and defense, somebody who in the last decade has worked with some of the biggest media houses including NDTV, Doordarshan, and presently is the columnist and the consulting editor regarding defense at Business Standard. I'm in conversation with retired Colonel Ajai Sukhla. Thank you for joining us, Colonel Shukla. Thank you for joining us. The first question would be regarding something that has been going off a lot in the media right now, and everybody has been fascinated by it, and it's related to Doklam. And why do you think it happened in the first place? Like, why did the standoff happen? I mean, was it India taking a step that it wasn't expected to take, or was it the Chinese who were trying to test the Indians as to how far it can go for Bhutanese government? Or do you think it was something else altogether? How do you look at it?
Well, first of all, it was India reacting to a Chinese initiative. It wasn't an Indian initiative at all. The Chinese road building teams came into territory that was contested between Bhutan and China, and that India regards as strategically important, and therefore was not willing to let China seize that territory. Why did China come into that territory? Now that's a big question, and that's a question that many Indian policymakers have deliberated over. It could have been because Xi Jinping was wanting to appear strong going into the 19th Party Congress. It could have been because the Chinese army decided that this was a good moment to show up India, its inability to stand by its ally Bhutan. They were completely taken by surprise, the Chinese side, when India actually entered that Doklam issue, beg your pardon, and confronted them and stopped them from building the road. Thereafter, giving credence to the belief that it was a pre-planned move, they went into public relations overdrive from the foreign ministry, supporting it all the way back to Beijing, which means that there was support from the highest levels of the Chinese government. It'll remain a mystery because the Chinese came off definitely second best. They had to, after making a lot of jingoistic statements, they had to walk off without achieving many of their aims. That road still remains unbuilt. And to that extent, this is something we'll have to keep watching. Maybe the truth will come out later.
Right. But talking about the bigger picture, the larger game between India and China playing out in the medium and long term, given the gap between the two countries in terms of military strength or nuclear warheads or income levels or even life expectancy, how do you look at the larger picture between the two countries?
The larger picture is that China is a richer, more powerful country, and wealth makes weapons. So to that extent, China is definitely a more powerful state, and India will have to keep that into account. At the same time, India is not that much less powerful than China, and therefore China cannot treat India with the same kind of dismissiveness that it treats countries in the Asia Pacific, the Vietnams, Philippines, Indonesias, Malaysias, and so on. China has to be cognizant of what India says, believes, does, and states, and India's concerns on the border. This is not just because of the size and so on, it's also because India is a potential balancing power between China and the United States. If China goes openly against India, if China starts acting deliberately and consistently against India's interests, that will only push India into the United States camp, and that is something that China does not want.
Right. Now, moving to our other neighbors on the other side, a lot has been said, and eventually, ever since the 2014 elections happened and the BJP came into power, there has been a shift from how the approach has changed over the years. In 2014, for example, Nawaz Sharif was invited to attend the swearing-in ceremony of Narendra Modi, and he reciprocated the same by going and wishing him personally in Pakistan on his birthday. And right now, it's said that the diplomatic relations, which can be seen in the United Nations General Assembly, has taken a toll. So, as someone who's worked, who served the army for 26 years, who's written extensively on this issue, how do you look at the current diplomacy and the current ties with Pakistan? What do you make of the situation?
Well, I have to admit that there has been a degree of inconsistency in the diplomacy. It's been blow hot, blow cold. It's been an outstretched arm or a handshake on one day, and then over a relatively inconsequential issue like the visit of the Hurriyat delegation to the Pakistan High Commission, which has been happening for years. All those gains were essentially squandered. Now, this may be part of a larger strategy. We don't know. But from what we can see right now, it has pushed Pakistan into a corner. It has caused Pakistan to adopt a highly belligerent stance. It has not stopped firing on the border. It has not stopped the infiltration of militants. So the question therefore has to be asked, what strategic purpose has been served by this policy? And to me the answer is, it's just inconsistency. It isn't policy at all.
Right. Taking it further in the diplomatic front, recently the biggest news that were constantly in the headlines in the last 1 month was the Rohingya humanitarian crisis. Now, I'd like to get your take and specifically on what role does India have to play in this crisis, which has been recognized with the UN. How do you look at it?
Well, there are two dimensions to this crisis. One is the strategic dimension and one is the moral dimension. At the moral level, India as a state which has adhered to human rights, which has been a democracy, which is a country with a long record of listening to its people, it becomes very difficult for India to just turn away the Rohingyas and just say, we will not have you. Nor is this permissible under UN laws and so on. India has decent relations with Myanmar and good relations with Bangladesh. And this is essentially a problem between Myanmar and Bangladesh where India is just getting the spillover. I think India needs to step in. India needs to negotiate and mediate between Bangladesh and Myanmar to put an end to the flow of refugees at least. And this cannot be done without creating conditions for those refugees to go back. Now, in that, India has to adopt a back-channel dialogue with Myanmar. Criticizing it openly and publicly will only get their back up. India has done it in the past, it has served no purpose. It needs to engage in a dialogue, create conditions for the Rohingyas to go back, and then, essentially defuse the problem both from India's point of view and Bangladesh.
Right. Now looking at our own country, now Kashmir has been an issue that we have been talking about or has been in the news ever since we got the independence back in 1947, and even in 2017 it's as big an issue, probably even more. Now, as someone who served in the army for such a long period of time, as someone who's reported from Kashmir, who's written on Kashmir, who's traveled to Kashmir, now Kashmir has always been in the news for some reason or the other, whether it's been AFSPA or whether we talk about stone peddling. How do you look at the current situation in Kashmir, and do you think the current strategy of this present government towards Kashmir is towards the right direction?
Well, my current view of Kashmir is that it's a pot which is boiling hard and that steam needs to be let off. And the way that steam is let off between New Delhi and Srinagar is through dialogue. There needs to be an instituted political dialogue that will give the Kashmiris a voice, that will let them believe somebody's listening, that will provide them incentives to de-escalate the public confrontation that has been taking place. But this is now essentially a popular uprising in Kashmir, and it has radicalized a new generation of Kashmiris who had earlier not shown any inclination to pick up the gun. Now they're back in the fray, their militancy is up. True militancy is being cut down by the army at an even faster rate than it's rising. But that is not the answer, that's not a solution. The solution is to engage in dialogue, to start making concessions of what kinds are politically acceptable on both sides, and to then find some kind of move towards a larger solution that will save India from this, albatross around its neck.
Moving on towards a different dimension, since you have worked in the media for so long now, the question remains that there, it's said that the popular idea, the popular interpretation of Mr. Modi is that he is not too fond of the media, because the only time he appeared for an interview is with Arnab Goswami a few years back. And barring that, there are very few interviews that he's given or very few media interactions. Now, but it's said that nowadays, whichever channel is functioning well, it's called to be biased or to be rightist. Now, as someone who's worked in the media for so long, do you think that this assumption of a particular set of people or a few people is correct, that there is a bias in the media, and with
anti-Modi bias, you mean?
And not an anti-Modi bias, but a pro-Modi bias.
Okay.
And as well as an anti-Modi bias, with NDTV getting a ban for a day, and Pranay Rai's house being raided, and a lot of things being written about that, and even Republic being not called a channel really, it's rather it being called something that is directly coming from the government, since it's totally pro-BJP. I mean, how do you look at it?
Well, certainly there are serious question marks over the government's media policy. The Prime Minister's wish to essentially bypass the media in addressing his communications with the public and his voters. The attempts to pressurize media outlets through things like the NDTV raids and bans, and even otherwise controlling access to government officials, controlling the flow of funding through government advertisements. Now, these are things that you see in a totalitarian state. These are not things that have characterized Indian governments in the past. So to that extent, it's a cause for great concern. But that having been said, the media has not faded out of the picture. The media still retains relevance. A large number of people still watch programs, even programs like Arnab Goswami's. And while it's permissible for media to have political views, it should not forget its basic function, which is to bring accurate reportage to the people, and then color that with political views in case it's necessary. You cannot start subverting the news itself. And that is something that is cause for concern, and the media needs to reflect.
Right. So that brings me to my last question. Now, having written about so many issues in the last 1 decade, and having served in the army for 26 long years before that, when today you're perceived as someone who's outspoken, who doesn't shy away, who's politically incorrect, who believes in calling a spade, when today someone as decorated as you is questioned, or rather, I'm talking about the troll element coming in on Twitter or on various platforms, because a columnist essentially will not only talk about the positive sides, he'll also talk about the negative sides. But somehow criticism nowadays is looked at something that is very negative, that essentially makes you anti-national. So when today you are questioned of being anti-national, or you are being trolled on Twitter, does it affect you, and how do you look at it?
Well, it depends on who's doing the trolling. There are some people who I would be really worried if they were agreeing with me. It's better to be trolled. A person is known as much by his enemies as he is by his friends. I think that this trolling was a function of the BJP government's attempts to control the media narrative, to browbeat and beat down anybody who disagreed with their brand of politics or political views. But it does not seem to have served the purpose of silencing critics and silencing criticism. As and when more and more channels are coming up, more and more media outlets are coming up, the print has come up, the Quint has come up, the Wire has come up, the government is going to find it more and more difficult to control the media narrative. So I think that, speaking for myself, being trolled doesn't make me lose any sleep at all. I would happier be being trolled by certain people than being praised by them. And in any case, the trolls are losing steam. they are not as vicious and vociferous as they were 3.5 years ago. I think they're figuring out that this battle is lost.
Right. Thank you, Colonel Shukla. It's been an honor. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you for having me.